In the middle of the 9th century, the lands of Eastern Europe were a vast stretch of forests, rivers, and scattered Slavic tribes, with no single ruler, no unified law, and constant internal conflict that made them vulnerable to outside threats. According to early chronicles, these tribes invited a Varangian prince named Rurik, a Norse leader and warrior trader from the north, to establish order and rule in the city of Novgorod around 862. This moment is traditionally viewed as the symbolic birth of Russian statehood, not because a modern nation suddenly appeared, but because a structured ruling dynasty began. After Rurik's death, his successors expanded southward toward the rich trade city of Kiev, forming what became known as Kievan Rus, a loose federation of principalities connected by river trade routes linking the Baltic Sea to the Byzantine Empire. These waterways allowed the movement of furs, honey, slaves, and precious metals, turning the region into an economic bridge between Europe and Constantinople. The most defining cultural shift came in 988, when Prince Vladimir of Kiev adopted Eastern Orthodox Christianity from Byzantium, a decision that permanently shaped religious traditions, architecture, literacy, and artistic expression. Churches with golden domes rose over wooden towns, Byzantine law and script influenced governance, and a shared faith slowly united diverse peoples under a spiritual identity that would outlast political fragmentation. Yet Kievan Rus was never a tightly controlled empire. It was a network of cities ruled by princes from the same dynasty who often competed against each other, planting early seeds of division that would later weaken its strength despite its cultural brilliance and growing influence across the region. The 13th century brought devastation unlike anything the Eastern Slavic world had experienced before, as Mongol armies, swift and relentless, swept across the plains under the leadership of Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan. Cities that once thrived on trade and religion were burned, populations were massacred or enslaved, and political unity collapsed under the sheer force of invasion. Kiev, once the heart of Kievan Rus, was sacked in 1240, marking the effective end of its dominance and beginning what later historians would call the Mongol yoke, a period of roughly 2 centuries during which Russian principalities paid tribute to the Golden Horde. Although the Mongols did not rule every city directly, their demand for taxes, loyalty, and military submission shaped political behavior and economic priorities, forcing local princes to compete for favor while limiting independent power. Amid this hardship, the small principality of Moscow began its quiet rise. Positioned strategically among forests and rivers, protected from some invasion routes, and led by pragmatic rulers who cooperated with Mongol authorities when necessary, Moscow gradually accumulated land, influence, and wealth. By collecting tribute on behalf of the Mongols and strengthening its military capabilities, Moscow became a central hub of authority. In 1480, under Ivan III, often called Ivan the Great, Moscow finally ended Mongol dominance by refusing tribute and facing the horde at the Ugra River, an event remembered as the symbolic liberation of Russian lands. This turning point marked the transition from fragmented principalities to a more centralized and independent state, with Moscow emerging as the political and spiritual successor to the legacy of earlier Rus, while claiming the role of protector of Orthodox Christianity. The transformation from a regional kingdom into a vast empire accelerated in the 16th and 17th centuries as rulers sought both internal control and territorial expansion. Ivan IV, later known as Ivan the Terrible, crowned himself the first Tsar of all Russia in 1547, signaling a new era of autocratic rule and imperial ambition. His reign combined administrative reforms and military conquests with periods of extreme brutality, political purges, and instability that left deep scars on society. Despite internal turmoil, Russian forces expanded eastward across the Ural Mountains into Siberia, opening access to immense natural resources and trade opportunities that stretched the realm across 2 continents. After years of dynastic crisis known as the Time of Troubles, the Romanov family rose to power in 1613, establishing a dynasty that would rule for more than 3 centuries. The 18th century then ushered in dramatic modernization under Peter the Great, a ruler determined to transform Russia into a major European power. He reorganized the military, restructured government institutions, promoted science and engineering, and founded the city of St. Petersburg as a new western-facing capital built on Baltic marshlands. His policies forced rapid cultural change, introducing Western dress, technology, and administrative practices while strengthening centralized authority. Catherine the Great later continued expansion through diplomacy and warfare, extending influence into Eastern Europe and the Black Sea while supporting education and the arts. By the late 18th century, Russia stood as one of the largest empires on Earth, powerful in territory and resources, yet internally divided by serfdom, inequality, and the immense gap between elite nobility and the vast rural population whose labor sustained imperial wealth. Entering the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Russian Empire faced growing pressure from modernization, social unrest, and the rapid pace of industrial change that exposed deep structural weaknesses. While railways, factories, and urban centers expanded, millions of peasants remained tied to land and poverty even after the emancipation of serfs in 1861, creating tension between reform and reality. Intellectual movements, revolutionary ideas, and demands for constitutional governance began spreading among workers, students, and sections of the military. Military defeats, including the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, revealed the empire's vulnerability and triggered waves of protest that forced limited political concessions but failed to resolve underlying dissatisfaction. When World War I erupted in 1914, Russia entered a conflict that drained resources, caused massive casualties, and intensified economic collapse. Food shortages, inflation, and military losses eroded public trust in Tsar Nicholas II and the Romanov monarchy. In early 1917, widespread strikes and demonstrations in Petrograd escalated into a revolution that compelled the Tsar to abdicate, ending more than 300 years of Romanov rule and centuries of imperial monarchy. Later that same year, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power in a second revolution, promising peace, land, and bread, while dismantling the old political order. The fall of the Russian Empire marked not just a change of leadership, but the closing of an era that began with medieval princes and expanded into a continental empire, ultimately giving way to the rise of the Soviet state and a new ideological chapter that would reshape global politics for the rest of the 20th century.